I'm Charlie and welcome back to another episode of Accessible Adventures. Today we'll be exploring the Kyabram Fauna Park in Victoria, Australia. Kyabram Fauna Park is our fourth and final Zoos Victoria destination and is located in north central Victoria, around 210 kilometres north of Melbourne. Kyabram Fauna Park is actually the youngest member of the Zoos Victoria family, as it was only officially placed under the Zoological Board's management in October 2022. Since then, there have been a series of upgrades around the park, and there are some that remain ongoing today, or that haven't been commenced yet. I was already able to notice significant changes between my first visit in March of 2023 and the trip we took for this video, which was actually in September of 2024. So I will talk a little bit more about that later on. I have also changed a lot over that time and wanted to give you a heads up so you don't get surprised when I suddenly grow or lose hair. With that out of the way, let's get back to the video. As usual, there is of course a dedicated accessibility page on the Fauna Park's website, which I definitely recommend reading before you make your way out. As always, the link is in the description if you'd like to check it out for yourself. If you have any questions though, the staff and volunteers are all really kind and happy to help. As we all know, the first step to any accessible adventure is of course to make your way to the destination. So that's where we always start. Kyabram Fauna Park is primarily accessible via car. There is a small bitumen car park on site with free parking for around 10 vehicles. This includes the sole accessible parking bay, which is directly opposite the entrance to the Fauna Park. There is also a secondary gravel car park attached to the first, which is shared with the public park and playground next to the Fauna Park. Just as a quick PSA, the playground next to the Fauna Park does have a wheelchair swing available for use with an MLAT key. I didn't have mine with me that day, so I couldn't try it for myself, but I'm still very excited to see it there. Now, as is the case with all Zoos Victoria venues, if you're not a Zoos Victoria member, you will need to pre-book your tickets either online or on the phone. If you are a member, you don't need to pre-book. The main entry and exit building houses the gift shop, cafe, and bathrooms, as well as being the access point for the Fauna Park. As usual, there are lines for members and non-members where the staff can check your tickets and give you a map of the zoo, though you can always download the map from the zoo website before your visit if you prefer. In the past, this is also where I bought food to feed the free-ranging kangaroos and emus, but they didn't offer that this time. Unfortunately, some of the free-ranging animal areas were closed during this visit as they were completing some upgrades around the park. As is to be expected, the map includes all of the animal enclosures, keeper talks, bathrooms, and eateries around the zoo. Once again, there is also a separate sensory map that details areas of different sensory experiences like loud noises, crowded areas, and free-ranging animals. Once again, this can be found on the zoo's website or from the staff at the entrance. There isn't a dedicated information booth, but any of the staff at the main entry building will be happy to help if you need assistance. Now that you're safely at the Fauna Park and have your map in hand, it's time to explore. First off, we're going to talk about pathways. The pathways are all reasonably wide and predominantly level in an attempt to cater to mobility aids or strollers. However, the majority of the pathways are gravel or dirt in most areas and significantly uneven in some others. There are also some areas that are not at all wheelchair accessible, but I'll talk about those specifically a little later on. I will say though that I've been to Kyabram Fauna Park many times now, once in a manual wheelchair and the others using my electric wheelchair. While I did struggle in some areas with both of them, I was able to navigate the majority of the Fauna Park in either wheelchair. I'm going to take a second now and say that unlike any of the other venues throughout Zoos Victoria, Kyabram unfortunately doesn't have wheelchairs or strollers available for hire on site. Overall, I didn't find navigating the Fauna Park pathways to be too difficult when using my electric wheelchair, but there were times that I had to change direction or seek an alternate route to ensure safe access. The new reptile enclosure was very accessible though, and I highly recommend it. When talking about pathways, I also like to call attention to benches and other rest points for people who need to take regular breaks. I was pleasantly surprised by the overall consistency and condition of the benches around the park. In addition to standard benches at most enclosures, there's also a large number of picnic areas with benches and tables that you could rest at as well. Now that we've established that there are plenty of picnic areas, I think it's a good time for us to discuss dining and bathrooms around the Fauna Park. When it comes to food and drink, you can of course bring a picnic from home, or you can grab a meal at the cafe in the main building. The main building is completely flat and step-free and contains one of the 3 accessible bathrooms around the Fauna Park. Just like at the Werribee Zoo, Kyabram has a large glass wall overlooking the meerkat enclosure in the indoor dining area of their cafe. Additionally, there is an outdoor dining area which is also completely step-free. As said, there are currently 3 accessible toilets around the Fauna Park, and they're all different. First of all, the accessible bathroom in the main building is my favorite and the most accessible in my opinion. It's nicely sized, easy to get in and out of, and contains a baby change table. Unfortunately, there is no changing places bathroom at the Fauna Park, so there's no bathroom with an adult changing table, shower, or hoist. The second accessible bathroom is in the Education and Conservation Centre. This building is accessible via a long ramp and has carpeted floors inside. The bathroom itself is clean and reasonably sized. Once again, it has a baby change table inside. However, the door is really heavy. I genuinely struggled to open or close it by myself. Finally, the third bathroom. There is a bathroom block near the new reptile enclosure that contains accessible bathroom stalls. Unlike these standalone accessible bathrooms, this is a single stall located at the end of a standard row of bathroom stalls on the opposite end of the entrance for the bathroom and the one sink. It is small, damp, and unpleasant. I also really struggled to close the stall door or maneuver my wheelchair in the stall. There's also a gated door to access the bathroom overall, which is hard to use in my chair. If this bathroom is still standing when you go there, I highly recommend skipping it and going to one of the other bathrooms if at all possible. Having said all that, I did speak to a staff member as I was leaving about the overall accessibility of the fauna park, including that bathroom. She advised me that they're still making changes currently and have plans for the next few years to improve the accessibility. They're also intending on removing that bathroom entirely. I don't know when this will be happening or whether it'll be replaced at any point, but it was there during my visit, so I thought it was right to include it. Kyabram Fauna Park is so different in its layout and structure from the other Victoria zoos that I wanted to talk about some of the different exhibits separately. Firstly, there is a series of walk-through or walk-in aviaries. The pathways or viewing areas for these are typically dirt, gravel, or paving. All of these areas, though, are double gated. For the safety of the animals, you need to be able to move through 2 sets of gates in order to enter or exit these habitats, which is absolutely something you need to know from an accessibility standpoint. Overall, these were very light gates, but there was just a lot of them. Also, the animals in these particular enclosures are very used to having people nearby, and none of them seemed bothered by the presence or sound of either of my wheelchairs. However, I do want to share a cautionary tale about the cockatoo habitat. During my first visit with a manual wheelchair, I went fully into that enclosure and had no issue. So when I went back to the fauna park with my electric wheelchair, I didn't really think about it and went through both gates again. The thing is that cockatoos are naturally quite curious and they like to bite or chew things. So it became readily apparent that I would need to leave and stay in the safety of the space between the 2 gates when one of the particularly confident cockatoos approached me and attempted to start biting the cables connecting the batteries to the motor of my wheelchair. We were able to leave without any damage to the wheelchair, and the cockatoo instead talked to us through the cage wall. I did mention this to the staff as we left, and on our most recent trip, this enclosure was no longer accessible to the public. I don't know if this is going to be closed off forever, but I thought I should share the tale just in case. I also want to quickly mention the koalas habitat. The koalas are housed in 2 enclosures side by side with a raised viewing platform. The platform does have ramps on both entrances, but one of them does have a tree growing through it. So if you have a particularly wide mobility aid, I would recommend using the other ramp and just being very cautious. Secondly, I want to talk about the wetlands. Kyabram Fauna Park has huge wetlands that you can explore. There is a large lagoon in the main part of the park with a lot of native wetland animals you can go see. On our first visit, we mistakenly thought this was the extent of the wetlands area and didn't reach the gates on the opposite bank. Please don't make this mistake when you go. On the far side of the lagoon is a gate that leads to the wetlands walk. Along this path, there are free-ranging kangaroo areas and a lot more wetlands. The walk ends with a viewing room deep in the wetlands where you can sit and observe the native animals in their habitat. I personally like this because it made me really nostalgic for a native bird sanctuary I used to live near as a child. Unfortunately, unlike at Hillsville Sanctuary, there isn't any built-in vantage points for wheelchair users in the viewing room. Towards the end of the wetlands walk is the viewing tower, which gives you an incredible vantage point to see the whole wetlands and its surrounds. Unfortunately, this is one of the 2 areas you just can't go in a wheelchair as it's all stairs, so I got Ian to check it out for us. Finally, I want to talk to you about the historic cottage and precinct. While not what you would typically expect to find in a zoo or fauna park, this little historic area is a really cool place to explore. There is a complete blacksmithing display, a series of vintage farming equipment, a mini museum, and a historic cottage. The cottage is the other place around the fauna park that just isn't wheelchair accessible. It has a large step and a narrow door and walkway with nowhere to turn around at the end. I am lucky enough to be ambulatory, so I was able to go in myself and see the diorama style museum interior, but unfortunately I know this isn't an option for everyone. Generally speaking, I do consider the historic precinct to be the least accessible area of the fauna park. In fact, on our most recent visit to the fauna park, I did accidentally get my wheelchair bogged in the historic precinct while Ian was checking out the cottage. Ian was able to safely pull my wheelchair out and smooth the sands back down for me, but if I wasn't ambulatory and able to stand while Ian did that, I think it would have been a much more troublesome mishap. I think this leads pretty well into the least fun part of any accessible adventure, the pain points. I want to make it clear that I really enjoy places like zoos and fauna parks, so I am willing to push myself sometimes too far in order to experience them, but I don't want my personal love of these places to overshadow the realities of the experience I have when it comes to accessibility. While I was able to navigate the majority of the fauna park in my wheelchair, the uneven terrain was a significant issue for me personally. personally. I found the bumps and dips in the pathway, as well as the frequent changes to path type and elevation, really wore on me after a while. The compensation I had to do to remain upright did cause me a lot of pain, and when also factoring in the long drive to get there, I unfortunately had a considerable flare-up which affected me for several days afterwards. There are multiple path types around the park, which may or may not be accessible to you if you have mobility or vision impairment. I want to specifically mention that there are 2 paths that go around the Education and Conservation Centre to the main lagoon that both lead to steps. So if you're using a wheelchair, you will have to take the much longer path back around the rotunda to access the main lagoon. Also, once again, the ramps at the koala enclosure are wood planks, which may be uneven or have gaps that could present challenges for people who use crutches or canes, and there is a tree in one of the ramps, which is an obvious barrier. There are a great deal of gates around Kyabram Fauna Park that you need to be able to open and close. These are most commonly double gates at the entrance and exit of all of the walk-through or walk-in aviaries, but they are also located at all of the free-ranging animal areas, the wetlands entrance and exit, and multiple individual animal viewing areas, including the echidna and cassowary enclosures. The vast majority of the gates are light and easy to move. A few of them are a little stiffer or heavier, but they are overall very good. Once again, we did come across a couple of issues with visibility while in a wheelchair, primarily around the echidnas and Tassie devils. These areas have short fences with windows in them, which gains viewing access for small children or people who can crouch down to the ground, as well as people who can see over the fence. However, when you're in a wheelchair, you find yourself at eye level with wooden boards. At least I did. Fortunately, these particular enclosures were empty during our visit, so I really didn't miss anything, but it was still frustrating. As I mentioned, I found the least accessible areas of the fauna park were the historic precinct, specifically the cottage, and the wetlands area, specifically the viewing tower. However, in both of these areas, there were still things I could experience and enjoy as a mobility aid user. When it comes to actually navigating the park, the pathways were manageable, the gates were generally light and easy to move, and most areas were accessible with decent visibility. But there were definitely exceptions. Once you've explored the whole of Kyabram Fauna Park, it's time for my favorite part of any accessible adventure, the gift shop. I am a sucker for a good souvenir, and I am personally collecting as many zoo badges as possible. Fortunately for me, as I previously mentioned, the gift shop is in the main entrance and exit building, which is completely flat and step-free. It's not as big as the other zoos, but it's still lovely. Once you've gotten yourself a present if you want to, you can leave through the automatic double doors that you came in through at the start of the day. On the way out, we had a chat with some of the staff about accessibility and the future changes they had planned. The staff were really lovely and kind and really open to our feedback. So that's my review of Kyabram Fauna Park in North Central Victoria. Overall, I do think that it is as accessible as it can be right now. As I mentioned at the start of the video, Kyabram has only been part of Zoos Victoria since 2022 and are actively working on improving the overall experience and accessibility of the park. There are definitely considerable barriers to access for a lot of people, but I am really hopeful about the changes we'll see there in the coming years. Even though it did cause me a flare-up afterwards, that's pretty typical of this kind of outing for me, so I don't consider that to be a deal breaker. While not somewhere I would go as often as Werribee Zoo, and definitely not at the same access level yet, I still do think that Kyabram Fauna Park could be a very enjoyable, accessible adventure, and I would happily go back. Maybe in a few years, I'll go back and give you an update on the progress of their upgrades. I know for a fact that they have now added a new splash park play area for children since we last visited, before addressing any of the accessibility concerns, which I'm not too thrilled about when it comes to priorities, but I'm excited to see it regardless. I definitely encourage you to review all of the accessibility information they have on their website along with the maps before you go, as they do keep them as up to date as possible, and it could be really helpful. Once again, there is a link in the description. If you have any questions about the zoo or my experience, please drop them in the comments and I would be happy to answer. Also, if there's any information that you think would be helpful for my next accessibility video, please let me know and I'll do my best to include it. I'm also open to any suggestions of places you'd like me to review. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you liked it. If you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on another accessible adventure coming soon. I hope you're having an amazing day and I can't wait to see you all again soon. Bye!